You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, you can watch this in a simulcast in video over on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. I've said that every day at the beginning of every show. It comes by rote now, so hopefully you all know where to go and what to see. But it's always good for new listeners, new viewers, to take a look at that, or to at least hear about it. And so come on over, join the chat room over in, it's going on live right now during the show, and join the other Intrepids over there. There's a big family of people that have joined us. And while you may only see a handful of them in the chat room publicly, maybe a dozen, maybe 20 people at sometimes 50, it gets a little crowded when we get 50 people over there. But there's a good handful of people that are the faithful Intrepid family that you're going to want to go meet and get to know them and become part of us. It's not like a cult or anything, but it's a lot of fun during the radio show. So go over and take advantage of that. Now, we're going to hop back into this whole talk of mystery language. And this can be some pretty heady stuff. And so I'll forewarn you with that. So as you're listening, if you've got questions and comments, come on over to the chat room. People will be talking about it over there. You can certainly write me, get a hold of me via my website, which if you're watching the video, it's right down below here. It's scrolling, scottallenroberts.com, and you can go over there and you can find a way to get a hold of me, and we can talk about these things, or just listen for the upcoming days and possibly weeks that we're going to be digging into more of the mystery stuff, and enjoy yourself, and maybe acquire enough information that you can process this stuff for yourself. I don't think there is a learning of the mysteries as much as there is a lifelong acquisition of knowledge and applying knowledge. And we'll get into that more as we talk about that. But before I get into the show, I'm going to do some visuals here. So sorry, those of you who are on the radio, just listening audibly, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing here. Only those of you watching the video or seeing this in archive. I'm going to throw up some, and this is kind of, some people might say, oh, that's just a big advertisement. And in a way it is. It's part of what I do for a living, but I want to show you some pictures. As most of you know, I'm an illustrator. I'm a designer. I'm an artist. I've been doing that my entire life. I got my first job as an artist in a print shop when I was in high school. I was 11th grade and a junior in high school, and I was given a job to run the little photo department, such as it was, in a little company that was reproducing theological books in hardcover, and they hired me to do a few drawings for dust jackets because they had seen my art in the, as you know, and I mentioned it before, I went to a big Christian high school that was part of a huge church, and some of my artwork hung in the narthex of the church and from art class, and so people hired me, which was kind of cool. And so that's how I got my start in publishing and advertising, was working for this little print shop. And so I've been doing this, I only bring that up to say I've been doing this my entire life. So since I was 17 years old. So here's what I've got. As you know, I'm a designer, I'm an illustrator. You can hire me to do work for you. I do children's books, I do illustration, I do design for advertising and publishing and logo work and all of that. But on the side now, as part of what I do for a living, I created a line of shirts, as many little companies do. And these shirts contain my artwork, things I've designed. They're all my designs. And so I just want to show off a few of them here and show you some of the new things we put up just last night, as promised, by people chatting about it in the chat room last night and other nights. So let me start. I'm going to throw up the first shirt here, and this is our new Intrepid radio program shirt. Here you go. There it is, folks. That is Intrepid radio program, and it's got the big full-color rocket ship, kind of Buck Rogers-style rocket ship, screaming through outer space with a big starburst in the background and the Intrepid radio program down at the bottom. Now, what you're seeing right there, for those of you watching on video, that's the hoodie. So that's available. A pullover hoodie with the big pocket. So this is the Rocket Pocket Intrepid radio hoodie that's available now. And let me just go up the line here. This is the t-shirt. Now, this is showing in kind of a steely blue. On the screen here, it also comes in black. And you can see right there, that's the men's t-shirt, or technically it's the unisex t-shirt. So it's that same design. Folks listening, you can get the Intrepid radio program shirt. And all of these things are available over at my Etsy site. And that's Etsy, E-T-S-Y, Etsy.com/shop/Son of a Patriot. That's how it all began, with the Son of the Patriot shirt last year. So there's the new Intrepid shirt. Here is the original, the Son of a Patriot, as many of you have seen before. My artwork was actually inspired. It's a comic book style character of a revolutionary colonial Minuteman. And he is representative of one of my forebears, the Robards, who came over from Wales in 1710 and settled in Virginia, Goochland County to be specific if you're from Virginia. And John Robards came over, and his 5 grandsons all fought in the American Revolution in the colonial army. And this is supposed to be an image of William Robards, one of my direct forebears going back about eight or nine generations. So that's what inspired that. That's on a shirt over there. You can also see the Daughter of a Patriot, which Audrey, our Man Friday, and she's over in the chat room tonight, she kind of inspired me to get a Daughter of a Patriot shirt. And the initial one was this one right here. I did it with the fiery red hair. Not because my wife's is like, how come you always draw women with red hair? And I said, I don't always draw women with red hair. I said, I just did the red because, the orangey red, because the color was really cool in the artwork. But it's really based on my wife, which is this one right here, the brunette. So if you want to, that's my wife, that's my wife's figure. So if you want to get a Daughter of a Patriot shirt, you can do that as well. And when you go over to the site, this is what you see. You see all the shirts lined up. Oh, and there's one that I forgot to put in here as a large, but if you see up in the left-hand corner across the top, you see, hop in, loser. We're doing butt stuff. It's a UFO shirt. This is a shirt that it was really Rainy that had me do this one, and by request. So I created a UFO shirt. And so if you go over to, and again, long advertisement here, but if you go over to my website, my Etsy site, you can avail yourself of any of these shirts. And I started when I was, even before I went on Odyssey Radio, while I was doing my show, I would do just a live stream. And that live stream then became something that I started doing a shirt for every one of them. And so there are designs in here going back into last year, designs that show all the different. Here, look, I'll show you. Like on this one, we've got the Betsy Ross flag. You can see at the bottom. We've got the Meatball Army in here. We've got the Facts Are Stubborn Things shirt. It's Not the Critic Who Counts, the Teddy Roosevelt shirt. We've got Daughter of a Patriot in here. We've got the Reptilians shirt and more of the Meatball Army. So you can see all these things. And there's a bunch of other designs over there. And there's one more design that I'm going to put in here and show it to you up close because I forgot to put it in a little bit earlier. Let me do this. I don't know if you can see all my wrangling around with it right here. But let's bring this up so you can see it. And there it is right there. That, folks, is the UFO shirt. It says in big type, it's got a big UFO drawing hovering over a wooded area, all silhouetted, and the beam of light coming out the bottom, and the guy going up in the beam of light with a bunch of particles of whatever. And it says, "Hop in, loser," in big, bold, white type. At the bottom it says, and then small type, "We're doing butt stuff." So that was specifically by request of the Rainy, my wife. So there you go, folks. There's all those. I got to go back through these to shut them all down. And you can see what's available. That's the new Intrepid shirt right there. The Intrepid black tee, and it comes in a couple of different colors. And, of course, the Intrepid hoodie. So there you are. Go over, avail yourself of those. The prices range from roughly $21, I think, for the t-shirts, to $23 for the women's t-shirts. I've got the women's with the V-neck and a little more fitted and a shorter sleeve. So the women's tees, they charge more for them. They're $3 more. And so I think it's only $2 more. And I just want you to know we make small profit on these, very little, a couple of bucks per shirt, but every little bit helps. So that's part of my business. It's what I do. So that helps you gather up some wearables for the things we talk about on this show. I don't know if I'm going to do one for, occult mysteries and mystery language and Gnosticism and things like that, but I probably should. So there's a couple of designs over there, two Celtic designs you can take a look at over on my Etsy. So again, etsy.com/shop/sonofapatriot. So there you go. There's my long advertisement, my long-ass advertisement for today. And that's just showing off some of the new stuff that we've got. Maybe if I did it by one shirt at a time, day by day, it wouldn't have to take so much time. But thanks for your patience. If you want to see that stuff and you're just listening audibly, come on over and take a look. So thank you for indulging me, for your patience with, I look at it, it's an advertisement, but it's also my work. It's what I do. I'm an illustrator. I'm a designer. I like to show that stuff off. And if I could give this stuff away for free, I would. But it costs me money to make them, so if you want to get one, come on over and avail yourself and get one. And at the same time, in a small way, help support this show. All right, there we go. That's it for that. Let's get into talking about the occult mysteries. Now, yesterday we were talking about mystery language, and we talked about ancient wisdom. We kind of sidebarred and went over to ancient wisdom and talked about that a bit. And where we left off yesterday, we were talking about how ordinary language, our day-to-day language that we talk to each other, employs allegory and symbols, and we use those things to convey meaning and particular meanings. Sometimes we don't even need to put alphabet, which is just symbols anyway, or linguistics, to conveying a message in mystery language or any language. Because we can use a flower to convey love. We can use a red stoplight to convey stop without somebody actually having to read the words. And so the elements of the mystery language, there's many elements. There's signs of all kinds. And we're We're familiar with all these different symbols. We're familiar with what hieroglyphics look like. All of these things that created symbols in our language. We're familiar with constellations and all of that kind of stuff. And so this is what makes up language. And mystery language, in a sense, is really not very much different. And when we left off yesterday, I left off saying we've learned three important things about mystery language. Firstly, that the mystery language is one of symbols. It's symbolism. It's not the literal meaning of the words necessarily. And secondly, that it's universal and it can be understood by anyone who possesses the keys to interpret them. We're going to be talking about the keys. Thirdly, that these keys unlock the hidden meanings of myths, allegories, sacred writings of all kinds and times. And we're going to examine some of these keys and their uses. But before we do that, it's important to say a little bit more about symbols. And this is where we left off yesterday, kind of teasing us for tonight. And let's talk about some symbols. Without a firm grasp of what they are and mean, it's impossible to understand the mystery language. So let's dig a little bit now into occult mysteries. And remember, occult just means hidden. It's unknown knowledge. It's hidden. And that's really all it means. Doesn't mean anything evil or satanic or anti-religion or anti-spirituality or darkness or anything. Occult simply means hidden from sight. And so we're going to look into these symbols. Now, one of the best definition of symbols from an occult perspective can be found in a novel that was written in the last century, the 20th century, so not long ago, a few decades back. It was Thomas Carlyle's Sartor Resartus, in which he says this quote, "A symbol is ever, to him who has eyes for it, some dimmer or clearer revelation of the God-like. Through all, there are glimmers something of a divine idea." So Carlyle goes on to say, in the symbol proper, what we can call a symbol, there is ever more or less distinctly and directly some embodiment and revelation of the infinite. The infinite is made to blend itself with the finite, to stand visible, as it were, attainable there. And so we are finite. We are this stuff. We are made of dust, as the old saying says. From dust we came, and to dust we shall return. That's our physical bodies. But there is an infinite factor that comes into play. And so the infinite stands juxtaposed to the finite, and it's there, and it's visible for us if we start looking for it, if we start thinking for it, if we possess the keys to be able to dig for this stuff and look at it. And the circle, just think of a simple circle, is the best and clearest embodiment of this whole idea of this symbolism. The circumference being everywhere and the center nowhere. And as such, it's always been and remains a fitting symbol for the deity, who is everywhere and nowhere. And we'll discuss this a little bit more. Just think of the symbol for God in Koine Greek. It looks like an O or a 0 with a slash across it. It's the theon. This speaks to, you see that, and that's a symbol for God. Even though it's the word omega. No, that's the alpha, I think, the theon. No, alpha and omega. Nah, I got that a little mixed up. Never mind that. It's the symbol for God in Greek, Koine Greek. Now also the circle is then also the symbol for deity, because it's everything encompassing nothing. And so our very life and being is composed of nothing but symbols. So what more profitable study can there be than to learn what they mean under all the conditions and from all aspects? And by symbols, accordingly, mankind is guided and commanded, made happy, made wretched. He everywhere finds himself encouraged with symbols, and recognized as such or not recognized, the universe is but one vast symbol of God. And as Carlyle said, he said, "Nay, if thou wilt have it, what is man himself but a symbol of God? Is not all that he does symbolical? A revelation to sense of the mystic God-given force that's in him? A gospel of freedom, which he, the Messias of nature, preaches? As he can, by act and word, not a hut he builds, but is the visible embodiment of a thought, but bears visible record of invisible things, but is, in the transcendental sense, symbolical as well as real." And that was Carlyle, who, though not an occultist, nevertheless he faithfully echoes the occult doctrine of the science of symbolism, which is a major element within the mysteries language. And so, to start getting an understanding, we've got to go back a bit to mythology. Nowadays, a statement is sometimes said to be a mythical, that's mythical in proportion to its being untrue. But the ancient mythology was not a system or mode of falsifying in that sense. Its fables were the means of conveying facts. When you read Aesop's fables, they were there to convey facts of human nature and facts of life. They were neither forgeries nor fictions. And I mentioned an example of this earlier. Yesterday, I guess it was yesterday, we talked about the magic flute. When we discussed the reasons why the ancient Egyptians chose to portray the moon as a cat. And the example is well worth repeating. The Egyptian sages weren't so ignorant as to suppose that the moon was a cat, nor did their wandering fancy see any likenesses in the moon to a cat, nor was it a cat myth, any mere expansion of a verbal metaphor for the moon, nor had they any intention of making puzzles or riddles to baffle future generations. They had observed the simple fact that the cat saw in the dark. His eyes are accustomed to the dark. And that her eyes became full-orbed and grew most luminous by night. And so as the moon was the seer by night, and the cat was its equivalent on the earth, they adopted it as a representative, a natural sign, or a symbol of the moon. So the cat became symbolic of the moon. And the moon as cat was the eye of the sun, because it reflected the solar light. So this example shows that, far from being untrue, the cat myth is a thoroughly scientific and very correct exposition of an astronomical fact and the occult truths that it conceals. So, the study of the hidden meaning in every religious and profane legend of whatever nation, large or small, formed a large part of the curriculum of the ancient mystery schools of Egypt and Greece. And we may say it still does within a few, truly great occult orders that still exist in the world today. Remember when we talked about how the ancient mystery schools of Egypt and Greece and Mesopotamia all had an effect on Judaism, an effect on Christianity in their early days? And that all still exists today. So as we stand in our previous, I guess you'd say our presentations, our shows, all the different things we've talked about Gnosticism and early literalist Christianity, where it came from Gnostic mysticism and the mystics, all this previous stuff we've talked about. There's no mythological story, no traditional event in the folklore of any nation at any time that really is pure fiction. It's not all fiction, and there's nothing that really is pure fiction. And we'll get into why I'm saying that in just a few minutes. Let's go out to break. We'll be right back. Sit tight. All right, gang, welcome back. Thanks for sitting through the break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. You can watch the video simulcast of this show over on my YouTube channel and join the live chat room going on there right now with fellow Intrep heads over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, in talking about this occult mystery, the occult language, or the mystery language, we're going all the way back to some things we talked about weeks and weeks and weeks ago. Talking about the fact that the ancient mystery schools that existed in Egypt and Greece and Mesopotamia and other places, that these were all the foundation to Judaism sprung out of some of these. Christianity certainly did with Gnostic mysticism. The stuff that happened before the literalist Orthodox Church took it all over the next couple of 100 years after its inception in Christianity. And so there's not a single myth that exists in the world today that no mythological story, no traditional event, no folklore of any nation that's purely fictional. It all has its basis in something. And on the contrary, not only is it not fiction, every one of such narratives has an actual historical meaning, a historical lining to it. And in this, we have to disagree with all the scholars, past and present, who, however great their reputations, find in every myth nothing but additional proofs of the supernatural fancies of the ancients. It's not just about that. Some superficial thinkers were admirably disposed of during the 19th century by one guy named Gerald Massey, whose researches into the mythical and the mythology and religion of ancient Egypt have never been equaled. You can look him up, Gerald Massey. And the prevailing view among such scholars is that mythology is a disease which springs up at a peculiar stage of human culture. They conceive early man in their own likeness. They look upon him as perversely prone to self-mystification and delusion, or as one contemporary cultural anthropologist recently put it, ancient mankind was subject to seeing things that aren't there. And so the origin and the meaning of mythology have been missed altogether, misconstrued, misinterpreted, misused, the word, by these self-appointed experts. Mythology was founded on unnatural facts, and it's still verifiable in phenomena. And there's nothing foolish, factual, or irrational about mythology, when its mode of expression by sign language is thoroughly understood. So the folly of all of this lies in mistaking it for human history or an outdated counterpart to the so-called exact sciences. Occult science, and that is such a thing, states that mythology is the repository of mankind's most ancient science. And when correctly interpreted once more, it's destined to sound the death knell at all the false theologies it's unwittingly given birth to. So, all these old mythologies gave birth to all these different ways of thinking. But those different ways of thinking have drifted off what it's really, truly, the meanings were at the core. And we've now seen that there's no ancient myth that can ever be correctly understood without the help of the mystery language, with its 7 keys, of which the modern scholars know absolutely nothing. So symbology has to be studied from every one of its aspects, for each nation had its own peculiar methods of expression. And in short, there was like no Egyptian papyrus, no Indian sacred text, no Assyrian title or Hebrew scroll that should be read and accepted literally. Get that? None of these religious writings, cultural writings, should be looked at the spirituality as literal. John Temple's excellent articles alone are sufficient enough to convince any fair-minded Christian that to accept the dead letter of the Bible is equivalent to falling into a grosser error and superstition that so-called savage whoever worshipped a fetish. And it's for this reason that even the most truth-loving and open-minded of scholars remains blind to the fact that every symbol in a papyrus or a sacred text or a scroll that was written down thousands of years ago is a many-faceted diamond. And each one of those faces not only bears several interpretations, but also relates likewise to several sciences. And this is shown in the above-quoted interpretations that we just talked about, of the moon symbolized by the cat, an example of what's called the sideroterrestrial mythology. Sideroterrestrial mythology. And the moon bearing many other meanings besides this with the various nations of antiquity. And so you can see where this starts to bog down a little bit and could get very heavy and heavy-handed, and presenting it as starting to look at all the symbolic things that make up our mythology that are really the non-literal mysteries that so many religions and spiritualities have been based on. So we got to get into symbols and emblems here. And there's a great difference between an emblem and a symbol. The former comprises a larger series of thoughts than a symbol, an emblem, which may be said rather to illustrate some single special idea. Sitting over my shoulder here, this little emblem, fictional, Star Trek. It's what they wore on their uniforms. It stood for Starfleet and the Federation and all of that. That was an emblem of something that had a singular special idea. It wasn't a symbol necessarily. And hence symbols of like the cat, the serpent, the dragon, trees and certain flowers, each illustrating a specific idea or a series of ideas from collectively an esoteric emblem. And the rose blooming upon the cross, which is venerated by Rosicrucians. It's an example of a symbol extended into an emblem. And to put it still plainer, an emblem is usually a series of graphic pictures viewed and explained allegorically, and unfolding an idea in these panoramic views, one after the other. And thus, the Puranas of India are written emblems. So the Mosaic and the Christian books of the Bible, and all of the other exoteric scriptures. So all esoteric societies and culture orders have made use of emblems and symbols all throughout time, all throughout history, all these things we look at, and such as the Pythagoreans, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Hermetic Brethren of Egypt, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. Many of these emblems it was thought improper to divulge to the uninitiated. And the magical seals found in certain grimoires, often founded on the hidden properties of numbers, partake of this character of emblemism. And although devilish or ridiculous in the eyes of the uninstructed, this conveys a whole body of doctrine to those who've been trained to recognize them. So emblems and symbols, if you know what to look for, it has deeper meaning. Now you may be asking, why it should be thought an improper thing to divulge certain emblems and symbols? Like when you think of the Masons, the Freemasons, why do they have all this secret? What's with the secret handshake thing? Now, there can be no harm in knowing these things, right? But there you'd be wrong. We'd all be wrong. I was wrong when I thought, man, it sure be nice to know all these hidden things. Why do they keep them secret? Just take two emblems that have entered in the public consciousness. The so-called Eye of Providence, which appears on dollar bills. You've seen it, the eye over the pyramid, and forms the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States of America, and also the swastika, which of course became very familiar via its misuse in the Third Reich under Hitler. The Great Seal gave rise to the most preposterous fantasies and conspiracy theories. And that actually does real harm to the symbol itself. What is this eye over the pyramid? The great seeing eye. And the latter, the swastika, was adopted and degraded by Adolf Hitler and his cronies to bolster their insane ideology of racial supremacy. And if you look now, the swastika is forever marked. And what's the word I want to use for that? We no longer use the swastika as a spiritual symbol because it was so maligned and abused and tainted forever by the Nazis. And so both of these emblems, the great eye over the pyramid, the swastika, are completely misunderstood and misinterpreted by all. And because, as we've seen, the keys to their true occult, deeper meaning are not in the possession of those who spout reams of nonsense about both of them. And even very minute differences might make an emblem or a symbol differ widely in its meaning. And so in turning the swastika to the left, the Nazis quite deliberately altered the meaning of this most ancient and sacred emblem and degraded it into a synonym for all that's evil and base in mankind. And it's for these reasons that the psychological, or rather the psychic and cosmological significance of some symbols and emblems have always been closely guarded, lest, in the examples as I just cited, they should be employed for evil purposes. So there's allegory and there's parable that comes along with this. The scriptures, the sacred texts of all ancient civilizations abound in allegories and parables. The Puranas, the Zendavesta, the old classics are full of all these kinds of parables. But until H.P. Blavatsky began collecting and collating together those facts, which she later presented to the world in her book Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, this is Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophists, and this was in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, and it was the best theological, anthropological, scientific scholars that were blind to their secret meanings. Yet a parable is simply a spoken symbol, a fiction or a colorful fable to some an allegorical representation. To occult science, it's something that's revealing spiritual truth, historical events, scientific facts. You look at the sayings of Jesus, the parables of Jesus in the New Testament, and you're going to see that same thing. Many people didn't get his parables. Some of his disciples, even Jesus said, we mentioned yesterday, he said, the world doesn't get this, but you guys get this. He was teaching his followers. He wasn't teaching the outer world about this stuff. The parables he uttered weren't meant for everybody to pick up. They were meant to be understood as you came into the inner circle and began to learn more. So remember, Jesus said, they don't understand this, but you get it because you're starting to understand the mysteries, he said to them. And so as a moral was drawn from a parable, that moral being, that thing, the moral to the story, was an actual truth and a fact in human life. So as an historical real event was deduced by those versed in the occult sciences from certain emblems and symbols recorded in all these ancient writings and the ancient parables, the religious and esoteric history of every nation was embedded in symbols. It was never expressed in so many words. And all the thoughts and the emotions, all the learning, all the knowledge revealed and acquired of the early races found their pictorial expression in allegory and parable. Why? Because the spoken word has a potency that's unknown to, unsuspected, and disbelieved in by modern science. Sound and rhythm, are closely related to the 4 occult elements. And because such or another vibration in the air is sure to awaken corresponding powers, union with which produces good or bad results as the case may be, no occult student was ever to recite these things, the historical, religious or real events in so many unmistakable words, lest the powers connected with the event should be once more attracted. You've heard about that. You can speak things into existence. I'm not talking about just tulpas where we can speak an entity into existence. I'm talking about, remember how we talked many times about how words mean things, how saying things, how dwelling on things. Even now, think of being in sequestration in your home because of a virus. Speaking fears, if those fears can be spoken into reality for you. We become what we speak. We don't give, in other words, we used to say, I'm not going to give that any life. I'm not going to speak into that. This is what we're talking about. When they would speak the words, they wouldn't speak them. They converted them into symbols and emblems, lest the powers connected with the event should be once more attracted by the spoken word. So such events, this is where mythical language comes in. Such events were narrated only during initiation, and every student had to record them in corresponding symbols. They were drawn out of their own minds and examined later by the master before they were finally accepted. This is like, I know in the Freemasons, just to become a Mason, you have to memorize certain things, and you have to recite those things. And these are the things that are not spoken to the general public. And every stage of the Freemasons has something that needs to be textually memorized and repeated. And you have to say the event and the story. And in this way, it created in time something like the Chinese alphabet. As before that, the hieroglyphic symbols in Egypt. In the Chinese language, the alphabet of which may be read in any language, and which is only a little less ancient than the Egyptian alphabet, every word had its corresponding symbol, conveying the word needed in a pictorial form. And so the Chinese language possesses many thousands of such symbol letters, or logograms, each meaning a whole word. For letters proper or an alphabet don't exist in the Chinese language any more than they did in Egypt until a much later period when you started getting the demotic text being written out in Egypt, which was taken from hieroglyphs and expanded into letters and words. It's less than pictures of linguistic meanings. We talked about water yesterday was the squiggly line, the wavy line. And cutting was the knife. And so a Japanese who doesn't understand one word of Chinese, meeting with somebody from China who has never heard the language of the former, will communicate in writing with him, and they'll understand each other perfectly because the writing is symbolical. All right? Now, let's get into the origins of the mystery language. All of this has been built up to get here, preparatory stuff to get here. So, having considered what the mystery language consists of, it's appropriate to ask how and where it was first formulated. Blavatsky, in her Theosophist, told us that there was, during the youth of mankind, one language, one knowledge, one universal religion. And in saying this, she's echoing the biblical account in the book of Genesis, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that whole Tower of Babel story. And the whole earth was of one language and one speech, says Genesis 11, verse 1. And whether this refers to the times of Atlantis or earlier, is that what it's referring to? It's a moot point, but we incline to the view that the building of the Tower of Babel, related later in the same chapter of Genesis, is most definitely an allegory for the demise of the universal mystery language, brought about by the signs of possibly an Atlantean race. I'm not going to go there. I've got some of this stuff written down, but this is some of the stuff that's attached to it. I don't want to muddy the waters by getting into mythologies and get away from the whole mystery language issue. So the whole Atlantean thing eventually led to the destruction of their continent. That's was all written by Plato and others. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, of all the earth, and they left off to build the city and the tower. And therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did therefore confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. That's all in Genesis chapter 11 in the Old Testament. And from that time onward, what was once the universal of all language of all mankind and the repository of the occult sciences became the exclusive property of the initiates who were scattered upon the face of all the earth. And this must have coincided with, very possibly, with an historical destruction of an historical Atlantis, even if that is just an allegorical tale. And so those few initiates who escaped the disaster went on to found the mystery schools of India, Egypt, and other places wherein the mystery language was preserved and taught in secret. And so the earliest means of communicating ideas was through pictures. This was the language. And we still use this today in cartoons, all kinds of other things. Design. I'm a designer. And like I was talking about the shirts that I do in the first segment, these are all designs. This shirt I'm wearing, it's a design that means something. And so primordial writing had at first no characters, but a symbol that generally stood for a whole phrase or a sentence, an idea, a concept. A symbol is thus this recorded parable, and a parable a spoken symbol. As we saw earlier, the Chinese written language is nothing more or less than symbolic writing, each of its several thousand ideographs being a symbol. So when, however, a pictorial symbol stands for a whole group of ideas or thoughts that might be variously expressed by a sentence or a whole group of sentences, it ceases to be writing in the accepted sense and becomes rather a form of communication out of which primordial writing later developed. And an example of this is the primitive Ogham script used by the Druids in England and Ireland, and it evolved from the use of the leaves of the tree as a way of representing both sounds and letters, or phonograms, or ideographs. And in this system, the elm tree, the elm leaf, stood for the letter A. Now go look these up. I don't have pictures. I should have put pictures up of these. The elm stood for the letter A, the birch for B, the spindle for C, oak for D, and so on throughout the alphabet. But at the same time, each leaf also embodied the metaphysical ideas associated with these trees, according to the philosophy of the Druids. And from the use of that's an interesting study all by itself, the philosophy of the Druids. If I was even to start thinking about talking about this, there's the whole mystery of the Druids and their origins. I've got down here in front of me their origins, their moral instructors, their sacrificial rites, their Druid beliefs and teachings, and all of this. So I've got all of that. Maybe we'll hit that another day this week. We'll talk about the Druids. But it's so all of the alphabet, the symbols represented in the leaves of the trees, and the trees themselves all came from the philosophy of the Druids. And from the use of leaves of the drawing of hieroglyphs is just a short step. And thus the drawings of the different leaves would form the first letters. Even the names of the leaves of the trees or the letters are similar at times in Hebrew, in Greek, and in ancient Irish. Take Aleph, Alpha, Elim. Those are all different languages of the first letters of the alphabet. The Irish name for elm is Elim. Elm, of course, in the Druidic language was A. And so all these languages begin with A as their first letter. The Beth, or the Beth of the Irish, the Beta. It's similar to the Beth of the Hebrews, the letter, or the Bet of the Hebrew, and the letter B. And B stands for birch, or vice versa, as we already mentioned. And although archaeologists and paleontologists are acquainted with all such ideographic productions, they remain largely unaware of the fact that from time immemorable our ancestors were in the habit of rendering their knowledge and their thoughts symbolically. So just how old is this method of communicating knowledge? It's inferred from some of the signs, evidently ideographic, found on stone axes, other implements of the Paleolithic period, rock art. Only in a few years ago, comparatively speaking, a Red Indian tribe in America petitioned the President of the United States to grant them possession of 4 small lakes, the petition being written on the tiny surface of a piece of fabric, which is covered with barely a dozen representations of animals and birds. And the Native American tribes have a number of such different kinds of writing, and this alone should have alerted philologists to the fact that the writing was known to mankind many millions of years ago. Yet these experts continue to assert that the true writing of the language first arose in Mesopotamia and in Egypt around 5,000 years ago, or 3,000 BC thereabouts, despite the fact that there are countless inscriptions carved into rock and cave temples of India that date back at least 12,000 years before our own era. Look at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and that dates back 12,000 years. And all the symbols of animals and men and different things all over those monoliths found at Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago. Now, we've learned that the universal mystery language is, I just shut down my window. Sorry about that, where I'm pulling my notes from. We've found that the mystery language is the language of symbolism and allegory, which uses ideographs or ideographs, hieroglyphs, pictorial representations to communicate ideas, facts, and esoteric truths, and that it was once the common language of the whole early race of mankind, who through colonization spread it all over the known world. And it's clear from the foregoing of the mystery language is that it's no ordinary spoken or written language, but rather a symbolic representation that can be interpreted in any language. You don't have to speak mystery language to understand it. And so we can then summarize that what we've learned about the mystery language so far is this. Let's get these 7 things down. And this is going to pretty much wrap us up for today. It's not a language in the sense that we understand today. It was used by initiates all over the world from the earliest days of humanity and is still used today. 3, it was originally common property of all of mankind, but since the downfall of the early races of mankind, it has since become esoteric, and it's now understood only by initiates. That's to say, those instructed in its use. 4, it's essentially symbolic, allegorical, and pictorial. 5, the symbols, the allegories, the pictures, the mystery language can be interpreted in various ways by means of various keys, such as numerology, astrology, astronomy, independent of any spoken or written language. 6, it unlocks the meanings of the archetypical symbols in myths and fairy tales, allegories, parables, alchemical books, and sacred texts such as the Bible, by revealing the hidden meaning underneath the literal and obvious narrative. And 7, that it's the basis of Sanskrit, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese and Mayan ideographs, and a host of other ideographical languages which later developed into the languages we know and use today. So there's the basis, and there's a ton. We haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg of understanding the keys to the mystery language. We'll look into that tomorrow. In 23 hours, we'll be right back, so sit tight. Thanks for being here tonight.